Signing off this week, boozing through lit. Fuck it.
All right. So
I gotta come up with a new one.
we have an interesting story today, and I'm going to sound negative about it probably in my pre-seed, but I actually don't mean to be. I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. So young amateur writers tend to make the same mistakes. In every writing class, there's a student who writes about a character who gets bamboozled to play Russian roulette. A female seduces her teacher, and a character who has snappy dialogue with a therapist. The reason the first two are popular is that there is instant conflict and stakes to rise. In roulette, death is on the table. In the set with the teacher, there are power dynamics to play with. In the situation with the therapist, however, it is because writers think it is interesting. It usually isn't. It usually a cheap ploy to show that the character is distressed and to dole out exposition quickly and easily. Susan Choi is not an amateur writer. She's won the PEN/Faulkner Award, the Asian American Literary Award, and teaches creative writing at Yale University, her alma mater. But in her story, Flashlight, the bulk of the action takes place in a therapy session. Hyper-articulate 10-year-old Louisa is brought to the child therapist's office, where she is in a fight with Jerry Brickner to not give him what he wants, which is for her to talk about the death of her father. The scene does not feel as if it were written by amateur, but the story is a mess. At least I think so, and I think that's interesting. I don't understand why some of the choices that Susan made, but they are interesting. The story starts off in present tense, with Louisa walking the breakwater with her overly cautious father on the night he drowns, before shifting to past tense at least a year later while she's lying in bed, now living with her wheelchair-bound sick mother in the Los Angeles home of an aunt she never knew she had before. In an interview with The New Yorker about the story, Susan Choi said she plays with how much to leave out about her characters' backstories. She also said she's been wrestling with this material for years, trying to figure out what it wants to be. On this episode of Boozing Through The New Yorker, the dark, like a snake, slid onto her chest, organizing its weight into neatly stacked coils that might bury her, crush her, if she didn't leap out of bed just in time, and with deft skill, silently reopen the door. Susan Choi's Flashlight. What'd you think of it?
Well, it's interesting that the author admits she didn't know what to do with it, because I think she still doesn't. I don't. I think it's. But again, I never want to fault people for trying. I never fault for trying. And then, of course, when it's published and when it's out there, certainly there's a degree of success that you've attained. But it seemed like she was setting the odds against her. Again, we have a short story where the protagonist is intensely unlikable, and the story eventually doesn't even like the character either.
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
The story doesn't like this poor little girl whose mother is sick with, it sounds like, muscular dystrophy, because she's not paralyzed. She gets out of the wheelchair at the very end of the story, but she's got some kind of wasting illness. So that's horrible enough. But then you blame yourself for your father's death.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're like, Dad, come out to the jetty. No, I don't want. Dad, come out to the jetty. I can't swim. Come out to the jetty. All right. And the one time he does, he fucking dies. The poor bastard, you know. And so you have this intensely sympathetic. It's this little. She's precocious. She's smart. She's suffering through all this personal tragedy and dislocation. She's moving around the world, but somehow I find myself hoping for worse things to happen to her. I'm like, can this little bitch die already? Oh, she's such a fucking jerk. And it's fine. It's fine that she's a jerk, but it's interesting that the story doesn't disabuse me of that notion.
Yeah.
Like, look at you, reader. What are you doing? Are you judging a 10-year-old girl? The story's like, yeah, let's judge her. The tone is
Yeah.
like, yeah, she is a little bitch. She is a little fucking just like, whoa. I didn't quite know what to make of that. Like you have a like you said in your précis, you have an articulate,
Mhm.
hyper articulate, as you put it, young girl, and we want to feel sympathetic. Like, oh my God, your father died, and your mom, but she just despises her mom. She hopes trap doors open underneath her mom's
Unhinged. I like the way
wheelchair.
that.
Hinging, yeah,
Yeah,
hinging open.
hinging open below
Because
her.
it's like this,
Yeah,
this
it's
immediate, you know, and
uh
now down the mother goes, hoping that this happens to her mother, and not even like you pointed out at the beginning of the story when the father's still alive. It's in the present tense. This the
which
narration.
I didn't understand
She
why.
despises the mother even then. Oh, I don't know
Yeah,
why either. I don't know
uh,
why
I,
either.
I kept thinking about where the story. I do this with a lot of things, but I keep like because she talks in that New Yorker article about not giving a much backstory, right? Like she plays with how much backstory to give,
Oh,
and I
because she
kept
doesn't know
thinking,
what the
why
story's
doesn't it?
about.
Yeah, why doesn't it start? And like I said, okay, why don't we cut out the part of her father dying because we don't actually see him die. It's just them walking on the jetty. We can. That doesn't really give us too much, except for the fact that she already doesn't like her mother. Her mother's already sick then,
Already doesn't like her mom.
right?
You know,
And then we have the
and
bedroom scene where she doesn't like the light, where she doesn't like the darkness, but she punishes her mom, who apparently wants to like hug her and touch her and read her bedtime stories, but she denies her. And then we get to the therapy scene, and I thought maybe we could just have that therapy scene as the whole story. Do we need those other two sections as
right,
much?
right,
And because it just seemed a little, like I said, it's kind of a mess because of the switch in uh tense, and then there's weird things going on with the narration. Like the narrator doesn't know everything. Like no one was
right.
there to know the last line that her father said to her, but knows a lot more about other characters and what they're thinking and what they want. So
Right,
they're
yeah. I had to remind myself a few times that the little girl wasn't narrating the story
yeah.
because the narrator, the things were being said that the little girl couldn't possibly know.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. It's not the little girl narrating. It's a narrator who's perched on the shoulder, as it were, of the little
Mm.
girl. But um, yeah, it was confusing about what the narrator knew and what the narrator didn't know, which is another kind of, which again, I mean, I don't know the writer from Adam. But by her own admission, apparently in an interview, she didn't quite know what to do with the story. And I'm glad that you told me that because in beer, there's a phenomena where Kolsch is a remarkable beer style, um, because it is about as naked a beer as you can get. It's it's so plain, right?
Oh, I didn't know
That
that.
and it's a plain beer. Like it's moderately uh alcohol. It's about 5% typically. The idea is that it's refreshing. The
Right.
idea about this says a little bit of alcohol, it's refreshing, it's clean, it's crisp. It's it's like the cacio e pepe of beer. Like you just have this stripped down naked beer
Mm.
and you enjoy it. Now, as a brewer, right, if you're brewing this beer, it's extremely challenging and rewarding because A, you get kudos from your peers if you pull it off. But B, it's like your brew system is solid if you can produce this beer without any off flavors, without any kind of sourness or any kind of cardboardiness or any off flavor is going to show up because there's nothing for the off flavor to mingle with. It's just naked. It's just out in the open because
Mm.
there's nothing else going on with the beer. It's very plain, right? So when you encounter a dark Kolsch, like a roasted malt, like a roasted Kolsch or a dry hop Kolsch or something like that, alarm bells go off. You're like, all right, why choose to brew a naked style and then put ornaments on it?
Right.
What are you hiding? What are you hiding? Are you hiding off flavors? That's the thing. That's why, and this story has these weird clunky jumps and I'm one like these shifts in perspective, these jarring and I'm wondering if it's just to cover the fact that the story doesn't mean anything. The
I'm
story
wondering
has
that too.
I'm
I
wondering, like, why are we going to follow a little girl who is profoundly unlikable, understandably so,
mhm.
and then the story itself turns its back on her, which is so amazing. Were you just as jarred as I was by the last line?
I thought it was
I couldn't believe it.
I love that last line. Like, I love the way that
It's
she's
great.
left in the dark. That's the way it
Yeah.
ends. It's like her mother
You
just says, "Fine,
stole
I'm
this.
done
Oh,
with
I
you."
gotta go apologize now. You actually did steal this flashlight.
Yeah.
And the mother who's just freakishly gotten out of the chair in the
Uh-huh.
dark, like you're like,
Leapt across the
whoa,
space. Is how it's written, I believe. Yeah. This.
yeah. And it's like, whoa. So now the mother gets back in the wheelchair with the aunt, and
Uh,
the mother rolls out the young, and they slam the door. Somebody slams the door, leaving her in the dark.
mhm.
And it's like, you know, the
It's
story itself doesn't want anything to do with her at the end. It's just like,
it's really good. I think I learned something from that, actually. That scene, how to handle an ending of a story like that. Like, it's such a great ending, but we have I there's a lot of things in the story that I generally don't like. I don't like hyper precocious or hyper articulate kids. And
mm,
usually I don't like.
something fake about it.
Yeah,
There's always
I
something fake. Like
yeah, I
Harold may have learned how to read before he could learn how to speak, but I don't care. Like it's
mhm.
just so rare. Like there might actually be kids out there who are that perspicacious and that articulate, but I don't care. I don't make them the subject of a story.
Yeah, I
It's kind
don't. It
it's
seems
just
cheating to me, right?
cheating. Like always having a superhero as a protagonist,
Yeah.
in
And
a
then it's
way.
also got the therapist, which I also don't particularly like in stories. Like I was saying, it seems like a cheap way to. It's the equivalent to having a character vomit, after seeing something horrible or whatever. It's a way. It's a quick way of showing something, of getting information out. And like the vomit is like having, like, show them that they're overcome with emotion or what they're seeing is horrible, so they vomit, as opposed to trying to find a more complex way to show those emotions. And not that they're all the time wrong, right? I'm not saying never,
No.
but
Right.
it's like
I
that.
thought the back and forth between Brickner,
Mm,
Dr. Brick, and Louisa, the little girl, that was the highlight of the story for me. I thought it
yeah,
was very well done.
me too.
I thought it was very well done. Again, I'm not saying that Susan Che is a bad writer. Never, not at
Mm,
all. It's just okay. It's okay to be stuck with a story. It's totally
yeah.
okay to not know what the fuck to do with it. In a way, this is the one thing that troubled me about the story. It seemed too obviously autobiographical. Like for the story to be confirmed in this interview, for the story to be sticking with her that for that long, it's about her. She doesn't know what to think of herself. And this is a main reason why I don't like learning author biographies.
Mm,
I don't want it to get because when I learn the details, it's like, oh shit, is this why? I wanted it to be magical. I wanted a story to just come at me
exist.
as itself.
Yeah.
I don't want to think that Susan Che was this precocious, soon to be Yale student, succeeding in a very competitive field, but looks at herself kind of as this little bitch in a way who was cruel to her mother. And you know what I mean? Like, I remember her mother's probably still alive. Who knows? But the
Mm,
fact that she psychologically is identifying with Louisa, I just didn't want to know that. Because again, what there's other explanations, and I'm open to maybe
mm.
this is a niece of hers or a sister of hers.
Right.
This Louisa character, though, is somebody very dear to her, whether it's herself or somebody close, and she doesn't know what to make of it, doesn't know
Mm.
what to do with it. But I just thought it was such an interesting choice to 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 essentially reject the character. Like there's something ornery about Louisa that predates the tragedy that
Mm.
she witnessed.
But to reject the character kind of makes me think, especially when reading this story, when I'm not sure what she's really trying to say.
Hmm.
I go, why? Like, I don't. I want to understand why she
You
wrote
got
it.
you got to get it out. She had to get it
Sure.
out.
She said in the interview that it may become something longer, which
Right. Another fragment in the New Yorker.
no, but I think it's interesting that the New Yorker published this, even though it doesn't like it's not like I think that is an interesting choice to do to publish it. You know, as opposed to like the Kafka piece or some of the other stories that are excerpts from novels. I think this is a much more interesting piece to talk about, to discuss from like a process point of view. You know,
Hmm.
because if because I look at it and I go, maybe that's just my style, or maybe the what I'm working with. I would have cut it off. I would have just started right, because the way it starts is when with the therapist scene is she was supposed to go to school today, but she was pulled out early this morning to go to the therapy's office, and that seems like a pretty decent way to start. It's got the now, it's got the difference, the change, and it has a lot of that information that we got from the other parts, like the death of the father, and the way they trickled in is a lot more natural, I thought, or a lot more even than just saying, here's this scene where the father dies, here's that scene where she's in bed and we find out that she.
I like that. And I totally agree with you. The
Mm,
story could have started the way you just suggested.
uh-huh.
But in the movie Unforgiven, the movie starts with this very subdued uh, uh, guitar music, very subdued acoustic guitar
Mm,
music, and it's sad, and it's just like a silhouette of a homestead and a man digging a grave. It's all silhouetted against this orange sky. It's probably sunset,
mm,
and it just shows, and like almost like a title, like lettering that rises up. I don't know what that's called. It tells this backstory about
right.
the major character William Money, played by Clint Eastwood. And you're like, why? And then the main action shifts to the town of Big Whiskey, where most of the action of the story takes place. Like, well, why start it that way? Why start it with this scene
Preambles.
of a man burying his wife?
Mm,
Well, because the story is about that. The story is about the monster named William Money,
mm,
and how when his wife died, his wife who quote cured him of wickedness, this remorseless, violent, drunken maniac who even other violent, drunken maniacs were afraid of, and never slept with their eyes closed around him, was actually brought to a level of humanity he hadn't occupied in years by love for a good woman.
mm.
And when that good woman died, it left him naked to the influences of the frontier, bounty hunting, murder, etc. And he goes back, he relapses back into a monster, right? So there's this thing where you he assumes the identity he probably never should have. He assumes the identity that's right to him, his proper identity. Maybe in this story, uh, Flashlight by Susan Che, I mean, that's the the thing which cements Louisa in fear of the dark, kleptomania, these
Mm.
power games she plays with adults. It's because she lost her compass. She lost her father, and it's like that's the scene. She never really seemed to care for her mother, but she did
Yeah.
seem to care for her father. She did actually seem to care for him a little
Yeah,
bit,
there's a line in it that
even though
says that
his
she's
influence was
holding his
too much.
hand for him or something like that. Like that it's unnecessary to hold her hand, but she says something for the sake of her father, not for her own sake, because he's gentle. He's actually seems so gentle that he's overcautious, and so it's
To a psychologically damaging degree. I mean,
uh,
you don't let your daughter eat anything unless you've poked through it
at
with
a
a fork to
restaurant.
see if there's glass. I know,
Yeah,
and you helicopter parent to an obscene degree,
uh,
and yet you're the cherished figure. And how badly must she feel betrayed by her mother that she despises her mother this much for being sick, for not
do
having any sympathy for her mother at all, for
mhm.
being sick.
Do you
No
think she's
sympathy at
actually
all.
sick?
The mother?
Yeah,
Yes, I do.
yeah, I think so too. But that was a question
I
they
do.
asked Susan in the article in the interview. Is she actually
Mhm.
sick? And she said, "Well, that she says she. I guess it was a typed interview because like she responded by emails because she's like, that is the question I wanted you to ask yourself. Is she sick? Is actually how she ends the question answer.
And
H
that's
M M
so
M.
boring. That's
It's a
so
little.
boring.
It's a little.
It's so
Yeah.
boring. Yeah. I'm
And do you,
wagering I'm wagering Susan Chay's in her 40s or 50s when that kind of postmodernist horse shit was in vogue
there
and she was writing it. It's I don't find that to be particularly interesting.
there
Yeah.
there is something interesting about the time it's set in. Like it's in a very specific time, which is like the
Mhm.
late 1970s. And the only
Mhm.
way we know that is because of the movies they discuss.
Mm. Oh, oh,
Close
well,
Encounters
I
of the
thought that
Third
was
Kind.
very well done. The idea that Richard Dreyfuss, this movie, the closing out, he leaves his family.
Uh-huh.
And that's interesting. He leaves his family. And that's what the father does,
Mhm.
not against his will.
Mhm.
He leaves the family.
I've
He's
never seen
swept
it.
away.
Same thing with
Yeah,
Star
Richard,
Wars, right?
that's
Star Wars,
that was
Luke,
the
I am
whole.
your father.
Yeah.
There's the absence of a father figure in that too. I guess I don't know. I haven't seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I think the child psychologist there, Dr. Brickner, is asking about Star Wars to contrast.
Uh,
This little girl initially says, that Close Encounters of the Third Kind scared her.
right,
And she backtracks when he kind of latches onto that. She's like, "No, it didn't scare me. Aliens aren't scary. It was kind of boring." Blah blah blah.
like a
And he goes,
Halloween, scary like
"What about
Halloween.
yeah, scary
Mm,
Halloween, right? You like Star Wars? No, I don't like that. Whatever.
mm,
Well, why do you like that? Do you like sci-fi movies? No, it's not. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is not a sci-fi movie. He
mm.
finally gets to the point where it's like, everyone thought this guy was the father figure in the film was crazy, building this little mud tower and shit, and then you know this normal life
Mm.
that the family had is suddenly turned on its head.
It's
What do
interesting
you
that you
feel
mentioned that, like about how the story kind of gives up on her because it kind of feels like the psychologist or the psychiatrist, whichever one he is, gives up on her too. Go play with the toys. But of course, he's writing notes. He's doing his work and stuff like that. So it might not be that, but it's kind of the same.
I think the writer gave us a clue as to what the story could mean, possibly the main meaning of it. I'm just thinking of this right now, and you reminded me of it. It's a line that occurs around the middle of the story, and it's when the young protagonist, Louisa, realizes or acknowledges that no adult really listens.
It's yeah. It's at the start of the
I think
psychiatrist.
no one really listens. No one really gives a fuck.
Mm-hmm.
No one really cares. This is a profoundly people care when it suits them, right? And her father, who seemed to care for its own sake, is gone. And the mother for some reason, I'm not quite sure what it is, but Louisa rejects her mother's concern, rejects her aunt's concern. But the message is that no one well, the message is that Louisa thinks no one really listens. I think that's important.
Mm.
Louisa believes that no one's really on her team. And the question is, I think that what happens to a child who thinks that way? And what do we do with a child who doesn't seem to have any redeeming characteristics? Is she an ultimate object of, like, can we pity her even though she's full of contumely, and and for all of her rhetoric, for all of her uh, precocious intellect, she's, she doesn't know herself, which is fine. She's 10.
Mm.
But why should the narrative punish her? I don't understand. Like, why should she be an unsympathetic figure? I don't get that. I really don't get that. And it's like, normally, why wouldn't we pity a little girl whose mother is suffering from an illness and whose father is dead, and she witnessed it? She witnessed it. And she's so much in shock that the sound of the flashlight dropping is one on sand,
Mm.
which at first I thought was, they're talking about earthquakes and, you know, she's out on a breakwater. I thought maybe, they were about to get swept away by a tsunami or something. That, how water pulls out
Mm.
first
The
and
current,
then
yeah.
rushes back in. But no, she wouldn't have survived that. So that's not the good answer. It's just that she came back online consciousness wise
Yeah.
after her father was already swept away, you know. And that's why the flashlight drops on the sand and not in the water. And here's the thing. Here's a really terrifying thing. Her father was holding the flashlight. Now she is. What the hell happened? What horror
Mm.
transpired that she couldn't even remember it? Was she holding her father's hand?
Uh,
Did he make her take the flashlight?
did he
You know,
drop the flashlight when he fell in?
if so, how did she get it?
No, may have
It's
dropped it on the breakwater as opposed to,
breakwater, this slippery,
yeah,
lichen covered. It's
concrete.
just like,
Yeah.
I don't really imagine that.
Maybe she asked to hold it
Maybe. Who
because
knows? We don't know.
kids do that. Can I have that, Dad? Daddy, I have a kid that does that, so I understand being anything in my hands.
Right? Did she kill him?
I was wondering that too.
Did she fucking kill him? Is she just a bad egg?
Or kill him by accident. Like, not to purposely to kill him, but to push him, right? Like, just to, kids do
Hey, Daddy, you
things.
sure you can't swim? Poop.
Yeah.
You know,
Because she's been in that water all the time, it says. She swims in that every day.
when
Well,
she clearly blames herself for his death. But kids do that. That's
yeah.
child psychology 101. Kids
Mm.
blame themselves for all manner of adult vicissitudes.
Yeah.
Mm.
And for
I
adult
blame
problems,
myself for my
parents
own
breaking
abuse.
up. Hmm?
Yeah. I blame myself for my own abuse to this day. I think I deserved it. That, I am a coward. I am a pussy. I am a wimp.
Mm.
Those lessons I can't ever divest myself of that. I carry that around every single day. And it's just because I was a child when I was abused. I was a very small child and I didn't have the experience to be able to say, like today, if somebody tried to systematically torture me and abuse me the way my father did, I'd say, go piss up the end of a rope, you cocksucker. Like, I'd
Mm.
fight him. All right. I don't have that defiance. As a kid, you just take it.
Right. I read
So
that.
for Louisa, she lost her father. She blames herself for
I
him
don't
dying.
I don't remember where I read this, but I read in the last week that when children are verbally abused, They don't have the sense of self built up yet, so they believe
Counteract
it
it.
is their fault, that they deserve it.
It's
When
this
you
is
hit a
another.
child,
Yep.
mm,
Children are scouring daily life for clues as to who they are and how to behave. And if you give them violence and anger, you're programming them.
have you ever written about a kid before? A child?
A
As it like,
protagonist as a kid?
yeah.
No, it's too hard.
Uh,
Too hard.
the
So I mean,
closest
I've,
I came.
I've had I've had kids in stories before,
Yeah.
but they've never been the protagonist. They've never been the focus.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
I
very
there.
hard. I mean, I can
Yeah.
understand why this has beguiled Susan Che. I can totally sympathize. It's hard.
How to
It's
write
so hard,
dialogue for a kid that sounds like a kid is saying it.
right?
That's
Right.
how to
How do you how do you engross readers who have a billion potential things they could read with a kid?
mm.
That's a question of the marketplace, isn't it? Like, how do you? We have this strange cat and mouse with the psychiatrist, I suppose, and or the flashlight. And of course, what do we? It's amazing that you have this very articulate child whose fears are very childish. They're very puerile.
We didn't even talk about the dollhouse. That
No,
was
we
such a
didn't.
big part of the story. Like, there's all these items in the piece that I'm not sure if they. I remember, like, when I write a first draft, I tend to pollute it with tons of stuff that afterwards I have to strip it back from because it's just like obscuring the fact that they're there to like obscure the fact that I don't know what I'm writing about yet.
Right, right.
And like there's three things in particular that I think of. One is the flashlight, which is obviously important. Second is the dollhouse, and the third are like her clothes that she talks about. The
Hmm.
clothes is probably the something that is closer to being finished because she's talking about she doesn't feel like she is herself in jeans and in these clothes. That has to do with identity. The dollhouse, I mean, it made such a little impact on us that we didn't even talk about it.
Yeah. One thing I remember about the dollhouse is how she felt grieved. She felt aggrieved and she felt uh, sad, as it were, almost for her father, who was laboring so hard to build something ugly she didn't want.
Yeah.
And but then she, as it were, through the example of her mother, who taught her how she could contribute to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, here, take this postage stamp and surround it with cardboard. Now it looks like a painting.
Uh-huh.
This tiny little life in miniature. Even though it's homely, you made it. Your
Uh-huh.
father made it. I made it. It's a family thing. We all did it together. And when we
Those are
went
good
next,
points.
it's just this thing where the dollhouse, you, it's a confirmation of family, I think, in the sense in that they all had a hand to play in it. The
Uh-huh.
flashlight, I think, is like this is your father.
Yeah.
This is what you hold on to. This
The
is what
light in the darkness.
this is what this is. Yes, your father's the light in the darkness, and you lost it. You lost your father. You lost the flashlight. It's gone. This tide swept it away. So you steal it.
Mm.
You steal it to feel. Obviously, people, compulsive thieves, do it to feel power and to outwit the people who are trying to catch them. I mean, that's a psychological truism going back 40 years. So we know why she's stealing things. She's stealing things to get over on people. But the flashlight is especially poignant theft because it's you. First of all, you're stealing light.
Mm.
Okay, Prometheus, whatever. Who cares? But you're also through this object, you're able to, as it were, rescue your father. Have him have this flashlight with you at night,
Mm.
because the night is what really, it's the night's scary. Darkness is scary. You know,
Mm.
we're in the West. in westernized countries, we all sleep alone. No culture has a fucking teddy bear because kids, you're stepping on kids. Like way human beings used to live, kids and adults are just part of the same thing happening.
Yeah,
We didn't have
childhood is a new invention.
childhood is a new thing. Well, not necessarily, but
Relative.
constituted as your own room, your
Mm.
own,
Well,
you know,
yeah. I read a book a
this
long time ago that
possession.
said it was like when you hit 10, you have to go to work, right? Like the idea of childhood as we know it now, where there's like specific clothes, specific toys, specific things just for kids, is
Yes,
more, yeah.
yes, right,
Mm.
much more. And the idea that you have these stuffed animals and things to keep you company in the dark. I mean, that's
Mm.
no other culture really has that except for westernized ones.
Mm.
And it's this strange thing where yes, you're alone in the dark and you're missing your father and you're missing your mother in a way, and
Mm.
you have this flashlight and there it is, and they take that from you too. But you fully deserve to have it taken from you. But then no one, you're not willing to be helped. It's
Mm.
it's a horrible bind that this young character's in. I feel terrible. I felt I felt awful reading this story because I want to like her. I want
Yeah,
to. She's a victim.
yeah.
In a way, she's a victim, but she's a victim. It's like I had flashbacks of being a teacher with kids who just would not let you help them. Like they would not let their lives were so horrible. I had this one kid. His mother was a madam in a shit bum brothel in that god awful port district where I used to teach at the end, Yongdam.
Mm.
And there was this corrupt street near Tapdong where his mother had a nickel and dime brothel, and his father was a John who was long gone. Right, he might have even been married to somebody else. Who knows? So he had no father, and his mother was an alcoholic, madam, and you just couldn't. He
Mm.
was he was he was as profound a victim as you can find, and he was the worst rotten sack of shit human you would ask for. Like it was the ugliness of his environment had seeped into his soul to such a degree that there was nothing you could do. It would have taken concerted effort by a devoted team of specialists just to maybe get this kid to vote. Like his name was Kim Gu-hyun, never forget it. And I just felt awful. Like how do you get this kid to not organize his dumber cohorts into brutalizing this kid who wears glasses like he was a bully? And I hated him, and I felt sorry for him all at once
Mm.
because of how he was becoming a monster. And he was only 13, but he was already the ringleader of this small little posse that used to terrorize this poor kid who just because he was a little chubby, he had
Mm.
glasses, he was very sweet, so he was an easy mark.
It's fucking textbook, you know?
Oh,
Like
dude,
it's
I watched it play in front of my eyes. I watched the very reason why we should all be extinct happen right in front of my eyes. Like this horrendous cyclical ugliness, like a child born into lovelessness, into a brutal world with very little options, right? In Tapdong, in
mm.
Jeju, or in the 90s when this kid was born. And this kid's abused, doesn't have a father, probably gets picked on and teased for that, whatever. Now he becomes this brutal, snide, ironic, nothing warm about him. He becomes a knife blade. Like this kid becomes the blade of a knife. You grip it
Mm.
and you get cut.
Yeah.
You look at it from the outside, it's shiny, it's of a piece. You try to get close to it, it stabs you. Okay. And then now he was spreading pain around him. And it's like this little girl in the character, Louisa is profoundly a victim, you know, and but that frustration I felt reading it, that she didn't seem to be able to be reached,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
And people
No,
were
no
trying to.
attempt. They were trying to, but no attempt was good enough for her. I don't know. It's a tough story to read, man, but it was
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Ultimately, right? It's good.
Good conversation. We got stuff from it. I learned from it, I think. Um,
Yeah.
and that's about all the time we have for today on Boozing, or this week on Boozing. Next week, we're going to be looking at Switzerland by Nicole Krauss.
All right.
Switzerland by Nicole Krauss. And um, you making headway on this?
I got mine. I have mine over there. It was printed in '94. I have a
Ooh.
1994 version.
Of
Uh,
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I'm looking forward to talking to this with you. What do you think? 2 weeks? Not this week, not the next episode, but the
I think
episode
we
after
can
that.
have it done in 2 weeks. Yeah, I think I'd have it done in 2 weeks. Sure.
Awesome. We'll gun it for then. If you haven't liked us and given us rosy 5-star reviews, please do so.
Five stars, please.
5 stars, please give it to us. Give it to us all your stars. And until next time, I'm Daryl. He's Brett. Together we are boozing, even though we don't really booze anymore. But that's a discussion for another time. Keep scribbling.